Hey there, my name is Jasmine Sky, and I'm here today with a primer all about masters in creative writing and what they are, things about them, just for any of you that have questions about what it means to have a master's in creative writing, what you can do with a master's in creative writing, how you get a master's in creative writing, whether or not a master's in creative writing might be worth it for you. Any basic questions you might have about masters, this video is going to just cover sort of the basic topics around getting a master's in creative writing so that you can make a more informed decision about whether or not you want to look into it, or so that you can understand what it means if someone you know has a master's in creative writing, anything related to that. So hopefully this video is useful. I haven't seen many videos around masters in creative writing on YouTube, but I will link two videos I have seen down below that I thought were really interesting and pretty useful. Again, this video is more just a general primer. I will have a later video where I talk about whether I think my master's in creative writing was worth it for me personally. So yes, I do have an MFA. I have a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from the University of Southern Maine's Stone Coast program. It was a 2-year program. I started with the spring semester of 2018 and I just finished up. My last semester was fall 2019. So 2 years, 4 semesters, which is a pretty typical length for a master's program, but I'll talk a little bit more about that as I go down this list. For this basic primer on masters in creative writing, I'm going to give you 7 general categories and hopefully clear up some confusion. The 7 topics will be linked down below with timestamps per topic. So if you have some information but don't have others, around between the topics, or you can just watch this video all the way through and get your information that way. So the first topic is going to be MA versus MFA versus PhD in creative writing and what all of those acronyms mean. So an MA is just a master's degree. Typically, MAs in creative writing are run through the English departments of universities, and they are going out of style. It used to be that the only type of degree you could get in creative writing at the graduate level was a master's and MA, but now the more common type of degree that you can get is an MFA. So an MFA is a Master's of Fine Arts. It's more of a studio degree, a little bit more creative work versus just a regular master's implies more of an academic environment. That being said, MFAs do still have academic requirements, and I'm going to go into that a little bit more later. The other type of degree that you can get at the graduate level is in fact a PhD. You can get your doctorate in creative writing. There are not many PhD programs in creative writing, and the PhD programs are not much different from the MFA program. So a lot of people will say the MFA in creative writing is a terminal degree, meaning it is the highest level of degree that you can earn in a field. Technically, it's not. Technically, you can earn a PhD, and getting a PhD is always a terminal degree in any field that has a PhD. But most jobs, if you're trying to get a professor position in creative writing, for instance, will accept an MFA or even an MA as your terminal degree. You don't need to get a PhD, so you should really only go to get a PhD if you want to be able to say that you have a doctorate in creative writing, or really want to do the work at that upper academic level. Just so you know though, I don't have a PhD. I do have a friend that is currently getting his PhD in creative writing, so I have a little bit of knowledge about that, but it is much rarer. So yes, terminal degrees and the job market. So will a master's or a PhD in creative writing guarantee you a job? Most of the time when people are going to get their master's or their PhDs in something, it is with the intent of having that on their resume for the job market going from there. Unfortunately, creative writing is a field that a master's or a PhD does not guarantee you a job. Many people getting masters and PhDs in creative writing do get it with the intent of maybe teaching one day, but the teaching jobs available are few and far in between, and for those teaching jobs, the vast majority of the time, you do need to have some level of publication so that you can stand out against the other masters graduates who are applying. That being said, if you do want to teach at the high academic level in creative writing, then you should definitely consider getting a master's or a PhD. A lot of colleges will not accept candidates even if you have a lot of publications. If you don't have that master's or PhD, then they won't accept you as a candidate for a teaching job. at least in the US. And everything I talk about here is going to be primarily focused on the US because that is where I got my master's, that's where I did my research, that's where I know people with masters, things like that. The other thing that is semi-related to masters versus MFAs versus PhDs is the time requirements. So some programs are 1-year programs, some are 2-year programs, most of them are 2-year programs, some are 3-year programs, and very few are 4-year programs, though if you are going for a PhD, you might see more of that 4 to 5 year situation going on. But like I said, the most common for both masters and MFAs is a 2-year program. So for the rest of the video, I'm gonna just refer to this degree as a master's in creative writing because like I said, master's is just way more common than a PhD and it's what I have more experience in. But just so you know, most of the information I talk about will also apply for PhDs in creative writing. I just can't guarantee it because I haven't done as much research into PhDs. So moving on from there, we're gonna go on to number 2, which is low res versus full res. What does that mean? If you start researching degrees in creative writing, you'll see those terms everywhere. And when I first started my research, I was very confused. What does that mean? So full res, or sometimes you'll see it as high res, which is full-time residency, means that that degree requires that you live on or near campus and you will go to college classes like you would for an undergrad degree. That's not an online program, so you will go in person to your classes, to your workshops, and you will live on or around campus for most of the year. Now, low res, there's a couple different types of low res programs. There are some low res programs that are basically completely online, so there is no in-person expectations. And then the most common low res program for creative writing masters is sort of a hybrid, where for most of the semester you are home. And then at the beginning of every single semester, there is what's called a residency that's usually a week to 10 days, sometimes 2 weeks, depending on the program. 10 days, I believe, is the most common length from what I've seen. But this residency will take place usually at a hotel, conference center, some sort of retreat, or potentially on the college campus because it takes place during breaks. But either way, wherever it takes place, you will go in person, you will have all of your in-person workshops, your in-person classes, and get a chance to sort of connect with your peers and your professors during the physical residency, and then you'll go back home, wherever your home may be, for the rest of your coursework. So that's the typical low-res model when it comes to MFAs in creative writing. For myself, my MFA from the Stone Coast program was low-res, and like I said, that was the way it worked. We had 10-day residencies in January and in July. During those residencies, we went up to Maine because it was through the University of Southern Maine. We did not stay on campus at USM. We actually stayed in a nearby town in a really, really pretty historic inn, and we basically took over the inn for those 10 days. We had all of our classes, all of our workshops, got to talk with everyone else as part of the program, all of the professors. Those residencies were some of my favorite times ever. You know, I guess just to give you a little bit of context into these residencies, I did not feel like I was missing out. I felt like I got a lot of social connection and academic connection with my peers and my professors during those 10-day residencies. And then for my program, at least during the residencies, is when you would choose or get chosen your mentor for the semester. So for a lot of low-res programs, I don't really want you to think about the coursework as online coursework because it's not like you're logging on and watching a class. It's much more like you have an independent study plan. So you get a professor, mentor, you know, for the semester, and you come up with a study plan together that consists of you doing creative work, and for my program, also academic work. So I just submit packets every semester. I had to submit multiple packets a semester that would be comprised of some amount of pages of my creative work, and then also usually 2 essays that I wrote about books that I had read, where I really analyzed them and did more of that literature craft analysis element of the program. So that was the way my program ran, and how, from what I understand, a lot of programs run, which is where all of the sort of classes take place during the full residencies. So all of the workshops, workshops, all of the craft classes, all of the lectures take place during those 10 days of full residency. And then again, you get assigned a mentor and you come up with a study plan. And then during the semester, you go home, and that's when you're doing all of your active creative work and also analysis of whatever books that you and your professor decide would be good for you to delve into over the semester. For full residency programs, like I said, it's much more traditional. You go, you have classes throughout the semester, workshops throughout the semester, and that's how it runs. So everything is sort of combined in one for a full residency, where you're doing your work for your craft classes, your literature classes, your creative workshop classes, all together as homework for your various, in-person courses, versus it's split for the low residency, but you're still doing basically the same work for either. So in terms of you deciding if low residency versus full residency is right for you, it's really a matter of your personal situation. Low residency worked really, really well for me. I really loved visiting Maine, but I am happy to be home here where I live. It really works well for international students as well, so that they can live, internationally wherever they live, but then only fly in to the US to their residencies just twice a year. One of my cohort members lived in Ukraine, so for him it was really good. He only had to come to the US twice a year, and then the rest of the year he was at home in Ukraine with his family. Third topic we'll talk about is funding, and that is one of the major differences that low res versus full res sort of creates, which is that it's very, very hard to find a fully funded low res program. And the reason for that is to be fully funded for your full res programs is usually to be given a teaching job. So I talked a little earlier about the time expectations for these different degrees. The ones that are 3 or 4 years are because you are given a certain amount of coursework that you are expected to teach. Typically what you're teaching in most of these programs is comp, so it's that freshman level essay writing course for undergraduates is what they're having the creative writing teachers teach, because it's just a course that everyone in college, most people in college need to take, so they need a lot of teachers for it. So they pay the creative writing graduate students and English graduate students to teach those basic comp courses. Some creative writing programs will also have creative writing graduate students teach intro to creative writing courses, or even slightly upper level creative writing courses, such as an upper level poetry or upper level fiction course. That's going to be specific per university and what they have laid out. So if you are going into wanting to get this degree because you want to teach creative writing, then it's not a bad idea for you to look for a full res program that will fund you via teaching as a way to get that experience. That being said, again, one of the reasons those degrees tend to be longer is because you're given 1 to 2 classes to teach a semester, and that is a lot of work. So you don't have as much time for your own personal creative work, so you end up having to take more years in order to finish your degree. So there's pluses and minuses to both of these things. Some of the low-res programs do give some opportunities for teaching and for learning about teaching creative writing. It's just not going to be as structured. So most of the best full-res programs are fully funded. They will fund every single student either with a teaching assistantship, or occasionally you'll be funded with some sort of graduate assistantship. You might help out with the sort of logistics of the program. You might be in charge of running the college's literary magazine, or very rarely you might just be given a grant and just have money to live while you're doing your classwork. That does happen. That can also happen with low-res programs. You can be given scholarships or grants. Very few low-res programs will offer them themselves, but you can always search for scholarships and grants through various external organizations that will apply towards whatever low-res program you go for. And I highly encourage you, no matter what program you're going for, to look up scholarships. There are a ton of scholarships. I know the Horror Writers Association of America has scholarships every single year for students. So definitely look up opportunities when it comes to getting money for school. For myself, my low-res program, it was not paid for and I did not receive any scholarships. I did apply for some, but I didn't personally receive any at graduate school. However, one of the pluses for the Stone Coast program is that it is one of the cheapest programs that you can go to. It is known for being a very affordable MFA and still a very high quality MFA. Other low-res programs such as Vermont College of Fine Arts program is very expensive. So, make sure that you are looking at various programs, how much they're going to cost you per semester, and really decide what is worth it for you. Stone Coast, the amount of money I spent on Stone Coast was worth it for me personally, but it's not worth it for everyone. So do your research and figure out what the funding is going to look like. It is very program specific, but that's a basic overview. So number 4, we're going to talk a little bit about specializations. This was very, very important for me as someone who writes primarily fantasy and a lot of queer fantasy as well. My undergraduate program did not talk about genre fiction. It was very focused on literary fiction, and this is true of a lot of academic creative writing programs. They really focus on creative nonfiction, poetry, and literary fiction. They do not often have space for genre fiction, commercial fiction, popular fiction. Those are all kind of the same thing. So there's only really a handful of programs that actively teach popular genre commercial fiction, and those were the ones that I sought out. One of the things that drew me to the Stone Coast program was that it has a specialization in what they call popular fiction. So my degree, my MFA in creative writing, is an MFA in creative writing popular fiction. Which is amazing for me, and I adore the Stone Coast program for having a very strong popular fiction specialization. And that's also one of the reasons that I sought out a low-res program, because very few full-res programs have any genre fiction in them, and when they do, it's only like a couple classes where most of your class time is still going to be focused on literary fiction. So if you're someone like me who really loves your genre fiction, then you might want to look into low-res programs because you'll just have more options. But I did apply for some full-res programs. I actually got waitlisted at Indiana University's program, which is one of the best full-res MFA programs, and one of the things that I liked about them was that even though they don't have it as a separate specialization, they do say they are genre friendly. So definitely look on the websites and see if they say they are genre friendly when you're applying for fiction, because you don't want to be stuck in a program that's going to make you miserable if you're someone who wants to write super high fantasy and the program it isn't geared toward that. You also will probably learn more if that's what you're interested in if you go to a program that specifically teaches it. So to back up a little bit, the different specializations that you can get in creative writing, there are 4. So like I already mentioned, there is genre, popular fiction, commercial fiction, all kind of the same thing, which is a rare specialization. Not every university has it. A subsection of that, some universities specifically have a specialization in children's literature. So if you want to write YA, middle grade, chapter books, anything in the sort of overall children's literature category, there are some programs that have a children's literature specialization. So I'm kind of lumping that all together, but I guess technically that would be 5 specializations. And then the 3 most common specializations you will see fiction. Again, most of the time if they say fiction, that is referring to literary fiction, so keep that in mind. And then creative nonfiction, or CNF, is the other very common one. And then poetry is the 3rd most common one that you will find. Oh, and the final specialization actually that I do know exists for some universities is writing in translation. Definitely, if you're interested, you should do some research into your university and whether or not they allow you to take classes outside of your specialization. Some universities are very strict about, nope, you can only take classes in your specialization, and that is what you do the entire time you're there. And other universities encourage cross-collaboration or allow you to cross-collaborate, and those are 2 different things. So for me, for the Stone Coast program, it encouraged cross-collaboration. You were always allowed to take literature, craft classes, and workshops across all of the specializations. All of the peers across all the specializations were encouraged to get to know each other, to be peers, to be a strong cohort together, and there's just a sense of a larger writing community at Stone Coast. But I have heard and I heard it when I was applying to other places, and also just from people I know who've gone to other places, that in a lot of programs that is not the case. They're very insular when it comes to the specializations, very much little pockets that don't really do a lot of collaboration or talking or socializing with each other. So even though I was not interested in CNF or poetry or literary fiction, and I didn't take any workshops in any of those categories, I did really love the cross-collaboration aspect of my program and how social we all were with each other and how much of a community it made it. So that is something that I would encourage you to look into when you're applying to programs as well. So I've already mentioned them a little bit, but let's talk number 5 about the types of classes you can expect from creative writing programs. Now there's 3 primary types of classes. Those are craft classes, literature classes, and workshop classes. Craft classes are the classes that talk about the writing craft and the sort of meta level technical side of writing. These are the classes, people like to say you can't teach creative writing. They're wrong. You can teach creative writing, and these are the classes that do it. These are the ones that talk about things like pacing, humor, dialogue. They talk about things related to, plot outlining, endings, how to tighten up your scenes, how to have better characterization, like anything related to the craft of writing. You can find a class on it. Most universities have course lists publicly available, so you can look and see what types of classes they offer. For my university, because it is a low-res program, I don't believe that they have a course list available, but that's because all of these courses that I'm talking about were all sort of lumped together in this 10-day residency. So they were all very much one-off courses that just kind of highlighted one small aspect of craft. But for me, they were very fun and very useful. Literature classes are classes that you will take potentially at every program. Some of them will have a stronger literature component than others, and these will be looking at existing pieces of work and really analyzing them for their literary nature. This is kind of a craft class in that the hope is that when you are analyzing these pieces of literature, you are really looking at the craft of the literature, but also analyzing the themes and things like that. Anything you might have done in a typical English class, you might also do in your creative writing program. For my program, our literature component, we did have some literature classes during the residencies, but most of the literature component was actually during the semester. I already talked about how we had the creative components, but we also had to submit 2 essays in each packet, and that was really the literature component, the diving down into the analysis of literature and really looking at it from a critical lens, which is a really good skill to have if you ever want to work in the writing industry, teach in the writing industry, anything like that. The final type of class is your workshop classes. Again, for full res programs, you will have your workshops throughout the semester. For low res programs, there's kind of 2 different types of workshops. There is your typical workshop class, which you will have during your residencies. You'll get put in a small group that is led by a professor, but it's a group of your peers. You'll all send each other the work that you have submitted for that workshop, and you'll read it ahead of time and give your critique of that person's work. So every single day we would critique usually 2 people's works in workshop, and this is very similar for those semester-long workshop classes as well, where you would have every day someone would be workshopped, and for the semester-long workshop classes you would be workshopped multiple times a semester. For the low-res programs, you are getting just a single workshop critique. For my program, we had 2 workshops a residency, so we would get 2 critiques, and then we would also be critiquing each other's work. And you can learn a lot by listening to other people's critiques of other work as well, as much as you will be learning from the critiques of your own work. And then during the semester, when we're sending our creative work to our professor for the semester, our mentor for the semester, then you will also be getting critique back from your mentor on your creative work. So that's like a small amount of workshopping that happens, but the primary workshop courses would happen during the residencies for a low-res program, and they are some of the most useful courses. Now, I will say different universities have different views on workshops and what makes a proper workshop environment. Some universities are known to be very, very harsh with their workshopping. It's all critique and no encouragement. If no one's cried by the end of the semester, then it's not a good workshop, is the attitude of some professors. And there are other workshops that are about uplifting people and still giving them honest critique, but using what might be called the sandwich method, where you sandwich the sort of harsher critique in between encouraging things and letting people grow by knowing what they both did very well and what they need to improve. So it's good for you to take a deep dive into yourself and know the kind of environment that you will learn best in. I knew for myself that a harsh workshop environment was not going to be good for me, so therefore I sought out a program where I knew that there was a more encouraging workshop environment, but where I really still did learn a lot. The other thing to note is that some of these MFA programs and some of these workshops are very white male heavy, and have a steeped tradition in old white academia, and that is not always a safe environment for writers of color or queer writers like myself. So that was something that I definitely looked into when I was looking into programs, was finding programs where people said that they were more open, inclusive, welcoming environments. And that's what I found at Stone Coast. Stone Coast is very much an inclusive environment that is all about writing, as they call it, writing for social change. And I really found Stone Coast to be a very safe place for me as a growing writer. So that is something to keep in mind. Some workshops might be less safe for some people than others when it comes to their emotional and mental health. Now, the sixth topic I'm going to talk about are the people. Again, I've kind of already referenced this, but one of the best parts about getting a master's or any sort of upper level degree in creative writing are the people that you will meet. So looking at the professor list is really important, especially when it comes to, one of the reasons you might decide to get a master's in creative writing is just so that your query stands out a little bit more in the slush pile, because you can say that you were mentored by so-and-so who is a big name in your industry, and that's always really helpful. So definitely look at the professor list, look to see if you recognize their names and see what they've published, things like that. But one of the really cool things about master's programs is that most of them have visiting authors as well who come through. So even my program, a low residency program, during the residencies, we always had visiting authors that would come through, some Hugo award-winning authors that you would have a chance to take classes from or workshop with or otherwise socialize with. So definitely the contacts that you can make in these programs is very, very useful. Now that I've done the Stone Coast program, I'm part of a large group of Stone Coast alum that I know I'll always have a community at sci-fi fantasy conventions in the future. I know that I can always go up to any of my former professors at any event and be able to talk with them as a peer. I know that I have my peers from the program that I can always talk to. One of the very cool things about most creative writing programs, whether they're full res or low res, is that your cohort becomes something of a family to you. So these programs are very, very selective, and they often only choose very small cohorts, no more than 10 people per specialization, and very often it's more like 5 people per specialization for these programs. So in the end of the day, your specialization cohort is very, very small, and even your general cohort is very small. I mean, if you think about it, a class size of 20 to 30 people is really tiny and really allows you within the 2 years or so that you do your program to really get to know each other, really bond. Again, some programs do more bonding across specializations than others. My cohort was very close. Our program was all about cohorts, creating cohort names. So I was part of the Stormborn cohort and things like that, which were always very, very fun. But then also my specific pop fic or popular fiction small cohort also grew very, very close with each other. And we are strong critique partners for each other to this day. I'm also critique partners with people who were a semester above or below me, or a couple semesters above or below me, that I had some residencies with in popular fiction. So the peers that I made at Stone Coast and the cohort that I became a part of are going to be lifelong writer friends. My professors are going to be lifelong peers. If you don't have a lot of writing friends and you really are seeking out a writing community, getting an MFA is a way that you can create a very strong community of writers that you will be able to lean back on for the rest of your life. Now, the seventh thing I want to talk about in this primer about MFA programs is applying to MFA programs. what is an MFA or a master's or a PhD application? What does it look like? What do you need for it? You may need to get your GRE, which is the graduate level exam. That is sort of the pre-exam that you may have to take. It's like your SAT or ACT for going into undergrad, but the GRE goes into graduate school. You will have to pay for your GRE. You will have to study for your GRE and take your GRE. If you are applying for a program that is asking for a GRE, the thing that they are looking for is your verbal score and your writing scores. But I will say most programs are no longer requiring the GRE, so you can definitely look and see if the program requires it for application. At the time when I was applying, especially because some of the programs I applied to were fully funded, many of those do require the GRE because they want to know your verbal and writing skills before they give you a job teaching comp to freshmen. So I did take the GRE and I did use that for applications, but I know the Stone Coast program, which I eventually ended up going to, does not require the GRE. Now, the other component you will need for every single application is a personal essay / statement of interest. The different applications may call it one or the other. This is very much your college essay. This talks about why you want to come to their program, what you're hoping to learn out of the program. Depending on the program, they might have sort of shorter essays. They might kind of break this up into sort of different questions, like what are some of your writing influences, what is something that you hope to get out of the program. They might do it like that. You will submit your transcript from undergrad, and you will probably need to have a bachelor's degree in something. It does not need to be in writing. It does not need to be in English. You can have a bachelor's in pretty much anything, and it doesn't really matter. And a lot of programs don't even really care about your grades at the undergraduate level. The most important part of the application is the writing sample. So you will have to submit, depending on the program, 5 to 25 pages of a writing sample. The typical best practice for your writing sample is a short story. If you are any type of fiction writer, popular fiction, literary fiction, even creative nonfiction, submitting a personal essay instead of the excerpt of your memoir is the typical way you want to do it. It's just a lot easier for the program application evaluators to evaluate your writing if they can see a beginning, middle, and end of a story. So if you have a short story, submit that if you can, that you think is of high quality. You can get in on a novel excerpt. I got in on a novel excerpt, but I will say that the assistant director of the Stone Coast program, when I asked her, did tell me that the reason I got in was because my personal essay was really strong and not so much because of my writing sample. Obviously, my writing sample wasn't bad or they would have turned me away, but my writing sample wasn't as strong as it could have been because I submitted the first chapter of a novel and it just didn't have as much of an example of my writing skill as a short story might have. The final thing I want to say about applications is that these programs are very difficult to get into. Some low-res programs are a little bit easier, especially the ones that aren't quite as well known. You might have an easier time, but most programs, low res, full res, it does not matter, are extremely hard to get into. Fully funded, full res creative writing programs are harder to get into than law school or med school. So that is a fact for you to know. They're not easy. You may have to apply for several years. I had to apply for 3 years before I got into my program. I did not apply for the Stone Coast program multiple years. I only applied for them the final year and got into it. And I also got waitlisted at Indiana, which was exciting, like I said. But applications do cost money, so definitely keep that in mind when you're considering your financial situation and what you can afford as well. And definitely, just like with querying, just like with submitting to publishers, getting into a graduate level writing program is so subjective. It really depends on, you know, if your writing really speaks to the applications, the admissions, and also if they see a spark of potential in your writing. Your writing does not need to be perfect. They're looking for a student who they can help grow. And that is definitely the thing that these degrees in creative writing will help you do. If you put in your effort into these degrees, you will grow as a writer immensely in the 2 to 3 to 4 years that you are in these programs. I certainly did. The 2 years I did the Stone Coast program were some of the best 2 years. It was a lot of work. It was very stressful. I was still working a full-time job on top of doing my master's program because it was a low-res program and I had to pay for it. So, you know, there was a lot that went into that, but the depth at which my writing grew, the amount that I learned, all the experiences that I had, everything about the Stone Coast program for me was amazing. I would do it again. I'll talk in more detail about my experience when I do my Was My MFA Worth It For Me video later, but that's just sort of the short and dirty of it, that I really enjoyed it. And hopefully this primer helped clarify some things for you about graduate level degrees in creative writing. If you have any more questions or you want me to do a follow-up video talking about more specifics into any of these topics or anything I might have missed, please go ahead and comment down below and I'll be happy to do another video. And that's that. I think this video ended up being really long, but we'll see what happens in editing. Thank you so much for watching. Please go ahead and click that like button, click subscribe, all of that. I'm posting videos on Saturdays and Wednesdays for the foreseeable future, all about writing and bookish content, things related to that. So please go ahead and check out my channel. And other than that, I look forward to chatting with y'all in the comments.